Okay, welcome back to Heads and Tails with me, Henry Faber. I'm one of the co-founders at Oppenheimer Education, and I feel honored and privileged today to be interviewing Chris Balme, the one, the only, the Californian, the first West Coaster, the first man from the United States I think I've interviewed for this podcast. Got to be the furthest guest we've had to date, hailing in from San Francisco and spending the rest of your time in Japan when you're not in San Francisco, which would be equally as far from London. Chris founded and served as the head of school at Millennium School, which is a lab school in San Francisco, and now he's currently founding principal at Hakuba International School in Japan, while also founder of several other things, including Argonaut, which was a private enterprise set up during COVID. It's an online advisory program for middle schoolers around the world, and I'm hoping we're going to hear a little bit more about that. Chris is an Ashoka Fellow, which makes him a leading change maker in education. He speaks, he trains, he writes books, including one that I have read, which is how I found him, Finding the Magic in Middle School. He's passionate about finding innovative ways for us to help young people to discover more about their human potential or to unlock that human potential. So I couldn't think of a better guest, really, for us with Heads and Tails. So many thanks, Chris, for spending the time and looking forward to speaking to you.
Pleasure to be here, Henry.
Chris, you know from what little you know of Oppenheimer that we're mentoring mad. We're obsessed with mentorship and mentors. That's our thing. So I'd love to hear any reflections you've got on mentorship and the mentors you've had in your life and your perspective on that with what you do now.
Well, I'm mentoring mad as well. Then prior to starting those schools that you mentioned, I started a nonprofit that was entirely based around mentorship, with a particular spin around apprenticeship and how to have mentors in workplaces that would give kids who otherwise were starting to check out of school or physically leave school, give them a sense that this was leading somewhere. So I'm right there with you. Over the course of that organization's lifespan before it merged, I think we created 17,000 mentorships in workplaces, everything from computer programmers to police officers and all kinds of things, anything that was safe to do. So that, I just think it works. It's just basic, fundamental human ways of learning, at high speed. And I've benefited from that in my own life. I feel extremely grateful for a series of mentors. And first one came for me when I was 10 years old. My parents were divorcing. I was in a turbulent part of my life, and a family friend became a mentor who was a successful entrepreneur. And I will never forget the lessons, I gained from him at that age. I'll share two brief ones that one of his mottos is that before anyone else got started, he'd already made a dozen mistakes. And I just love the humility of that. And it taught me the spirit of iteration, that nobody creates anything perfect, especially not on the first try, that we're just tinkerers. And the faster you get into tinkering, the faster you learn. And his other lesson was that he took care of people. He had such a big social network and was constantly in touch, trying to figure out what he could do to be helpful, who he could connect. So I feel incredibly grateful. I learned how to tinker and how to network from someone, when I was in middle school, and that helped. It still helps a long time later.
I love both of those things. I feel like I'm tinkering and networking on a daily basis. That's pretty much all I do.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of go-giver mentality you've got to find, of like the breadcrumb trail, I call it. How do you sort of snowball one introduction to another and find yourself in interesting conversations like this one that we're having now. So I think it's a good kind of outward perspective that a good mentor can give you. That sounds great. What about Chris, the teenager? If I take you back, is there something you can give us as an anecdote that tells us a little bit about what you were like as a student?
I mean, it was a hard time, and I think that's why I've done all the work I've done since. The moment that often comes to mind when I kind of to epitomize what middle and high school felt like. I was a cello player, and that was actually the one part of school that I liked, was orchestra. And it was lucky that it was the first thing of the day. Otherwise, I might not have shown up. But I could vividly remember in middle school, my parents, in their wisdom, had given me a cello backpack, which, if you can imagine, is absolutely the largest backpack you could possibly conceive of. And my very first day wearing it, I had no idea how tall it was. And I walked in the front door of the school, surrounded by kids. Cello slammed off the top of the door, and I went down for the count on the floor. And I'm laughing about it now, but at the time, that feeling that so is middle school, of feeling like everybody is watching this and my life is over as a result. I'll never recover from this. And I think that was, that middle school was incredibly hard for that reason. The self-consciousness and the lack of the school I was in, as most schools, didn't see my social or emotional well-being as in their purview. That was for someone else to figure out, and no one else helped with that, really.
So
So
we feel that's changed enough now? You feel
no,
excited by the
I
way middle
don't.
schoolers are treated globally now, or is that a
No.
longer conversation?
Oh, I don't think it's changed. I think it's changing. So I do feel optimistic about the direction of travel. But no, I still think most middle schools, in fact, are working against middle schoolers' developmental drives and are making things much more adversarial or difficult for them, which is why middle school has the reputation, at least in the States, of being the absolute worst part of the K-12 system. I don't think it is inherently. Yeah.
We have an interesting contrast with you here in that middle school kind of did exist as a concept within the UK, but now we start secondary school. Our kind of high school experience for most children in the country is a 7-year experience, starting aged 11, turning 12. And so that middle school experience plays out in the first 3 years of your time in a large high school, perhaps even more brutal as a version of what you've just described. My version of that was the flute rather than the cello.
Ah, really?
And we won't go into too much detail, but the flute was probably not the instrument I needed to make friends. So we've learned
Curious to
valuable,
hear that story. Yeah.
valuable, maybe one for another time. What about tough moments since in your career? Maybe tough and positive. We can do, low points and high points, but perhaps there's a couple of peaks and troughs you'd be happy to reflect on in a very varied and broad career. You're not just a head teacher. You've done so many other things around that. I'm interested to hear what you reflect on as the best and worst bits of that.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with a tough one. I started Millennium School with a wonderful team 11 years ago now, and 7 years into being a head of school there, I left. And that was probably the hardest moment in my career, because I was both so incredibly attached to this community. I mean, I practically lived there, and that also was why I left, because it was a situation of burnout. And in the course of those 7 years of being a head of school, I had 3 children, and we were doing so much to innovate, and I think successfully in many ways, on the design of school. And yet I could not figure out how to innovate enough in the role of a head of school that could be sustainable. And I eventually came to a point of feeling like I'm not good enough at setting boundaries, such that I can be the parent I want to be and the head of school I want to be. So I knew which one had to go at that point, but it was incredibly hard.
And maybe just to pause there on that tough moment before you take us to some glorious Everest. Is that at the heart of like the teacher retention crisis globally anyway? I don't know to what extent it exists in your network to the same as it does here, but in the UK, there are going to be people listening to this who are like, oh, this is why it's tough to stay in a job like this for a long period of time. And are we finding ways to make that a more attractive career and a more sustainable career to stay at, whether you're in a leadership position or a teaching position? How do you reflect on that as like something culturally we can affect?
I do think it's at the heart of it that schools are kind of accumulating more and more responsibility. And if you think about it, the school now serves the functions that many institutions collectively used to serve in a healthy community. And now, a parent drops their kid off at school and expects them to be excellent in an impossible number of domains. Not only excellent and engaging in every possible academic pursuit, but socially and emotionally, in sports, in arts, in everything you could possibly imagine. It's very difficult to build an institution that's good at all of those things. It's kind of like saying, instead of building one really good restaurant, we need a restaurant that is the best at every world cuisine. And I think that's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah, that's a tough ask. The restaurant that doesn't sound like a great restaurant. I'm
No,
not sure I want to go there.
you just know it's not going to be good at everything.
Yeah, sounds a little
And
bit
then
like a
parents-
shopping mall.
Yeah, exactly. And then parents are disappointed. So it's really, we have to shift that expectation and make it more of a community held responsibility rather than one monolithic institution.
I like that, community held responsibility. It's a nice phrase. What about the peaks, the Everests?
Oh, yeah, lots of those to share. I mean, I think my best, happiest moments are as a facilitator. I'll say with Millennium, one of my biggest lessons in starting that school is about how to help people shift from the mentality of an instructor who's concerned about content primarily to the mentality of a facilitator who is concerned about conditions. I think when you take that in deeply, it completely transforms what teaching is. And I know it did for me, that I went into teaching first, as a student teacher. I taught middle school very much as an instructor. This is a list of content areas, and I will do my best to make sure you know them. And through the course of starting Millennium, I learned what it is to be a facilitator, where I'm much less attached to specific academic bits of crystallized knowledge, but I'm really thinking about how do I make this space one where you want to be here, it feels safe, you can be curious, you can fail. And then the kind of epitome of that is through advisory work, which at Millennium is one of the cores of the school. It's groups of 8 to 10 kids who see each other every day, once a week for a longer stretch, and they're together with one teacher for 3 full years, so the whole arc of middle school. And that becomes their center of belonging, where they feel like unconditionally, I am welcome here. I can bring up whatever I want to bring up, socially, emotionally, academically. Those groups become so close. So for me, my absolutely most satisfying work as an educator is being a facilitator to groups of tweens and teens, or training teachers to be facilitators, because I think it's such an unlock. It's why most of us got into this profession, to have that closeness to coach, and we get distracted by all the instructor pressures. So it's still great to know how to be an instructor, but I think we overuse that skill set and we underdevelop the facilitator skill set.
I love that. I mean, I love the idea of this 3-year journey of belonging to one advisory group, you call it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's fascinating. We know a lot about tutoring groups, pastoral groups. They just have different namings, but essentially like the bringing together of kids under one roof. But I think there's a lot of schools where that's quite tokenistic.
Exactly.
And doesn't serve much of a purpose, or certainly isn't like longitudinal, and doesn't always provide the space for like particularly strong pastoral relationships anyway. It's a little bit of a byproduct of like what time is free in the day. So amazing to hear that like carved out over such a long period of time. That's pretty atypical. Is that right to say?
Extremely atypical. Yeah, here as well, that most schools have that time set aside, call it advisory or what you will, but it becomes kind of administrative or study hall, or teachers just they don't get prepared for it, so there's not time to make it as rich as it could be. But that's changing. I've been lucky to work with a number of schools in the last several years that are really investing in this program and finding that it changes students' relationship to school. If you have that one place where you feel belonging and connection, it starts to extend to your relationship to school as a whole, and you show up differently. I mean, middle schoolers especially, when they have a secure sense of belonging, that changes how much they can learn the rest of the day. And if belonging is not secure, it's so threatening, that they won't be able to learn anywhere to their potential. So I think it's key. I think it's possible. The fact that the time is in the school schedule already is so opportune. You don't have to fight for the minutes. You just need to prepare people to use the minutes that are already there.
Totally there. I love that sense of continuity and security. I think that sounds fantastic. How interesting. Okay, great. I want to take us on to content. Are you a reader? Are you a listener? What forms are you getting your content from? And is there anything you can recommend for us? And it can't be your own book.
Yeah. Deal. I'm a mega reader. I enjoy podcasts, but reading is by far my happier place. So one of my favorite books we just read as a whole team on the Hakuba team last year is called An Ethic of Excellence. I don't know if you've come across this one by an American teacher named Ron Berger, and he really helped to start the project-based learning movement in the U.S. at least. It's a small book. It's probably 150 pages, and it is so beautiful as a description of what project-based learning can be, how you kind of create conditions where kids surprise themselves by the the real world quality of what they can create together. So strong recommendation for that
I
one.
love that. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll eat that one up next week. Thank you, Amazon. Next on my list, a controversial or unpopular opinion. I mean, education is full of contextual complexities and political footballs. What would you be happy to stand up on a soapbox and say, "This is my opinion, judge it, but it's mine"?
Yeah, oh boy. This might be a dangerous one that will probably get me into trouble in some spaces. I think that coercion kills schools, and that most schools are still, even great schools, often are still highly coercive places where kids don't really have a choice, and teachers are forced to engage them by being more entertaining rather than tapping into the intrinsic motivation that comes when you have choice. So it's a hard one to say because that's a hard one to change.
No, no, that's fascinating. So how do you encourage that intrinsic motivation? And what's the first step on the road to that? There are a million things you could do, but what comes to
I,
mind?
I think we underestimate kids systematically, and we baby them, which unconsciously they start to believe, and I think it creates a lot of frustration. So anytime we can return a little bit of power and control to them, it helps. That could be in an advisory space where they set the agenda. This is not a lesson plan. Could be a student government that has non-tokenistic forms of power. Those would be some of the first steps.
Love that. That underestimation, that reminds me of that anchoring effect that you write about. I think it's a fascinating concept, this idea that we take on the initial information that's shared with us or our first perspective on someone or something, and then we hook ourselves into that. And so we struggle to recognize that that kid is, as you put it, ready to make the batter for their pancakes rather than just cut it up with a knife and fork. So it's a truism that I think is so true of parents. We work with parents so much where they can't quite see the wood from the trees, that their kids are at a different stage from where they were before. And it's a
Absolutely.
interesting one to deal with as an impartial other, as like a mentor who comes into that process with, in theory, perspective and impartiality, but trying to treat that child with a maturity that's going to help them take them forward. I think it's interesting.
And speaking as a parent, we need those reminders because if we lag behind our kids, they often interpret that as a lack of trust, and it can create disconnection. So when we get to update, which makes us a little uncomfortable, but we meet them where they actually are, and it creates deeper relationships.
You have all this depth of knowledge and experience with kids. How has that affected your parenting?
Oh, well, I joke about this
I
all
mean,
the time with my wife.
pressure's on, right? Pressure's on to be the best dad out there.
No, I say knowing the developmental territory makes it easier, but it does not make it easy. Our kids know exactly where our buttons are. We've grown them together. So I would not say I find parenting easy, but I do find it, thrilling and scary all at once. Especially, my oldest one is now entering, she's in middle school, and I get to test out these ideas that I've cherished and acted on with students. And she challenges me on them constantly because she knows the book as well. But I'd say easier but not easy is the best answer I can give.
Yeah, well, if it's hard for you, it's going to be hard for everybody else, that's for sure. And what space there for mentoring or impartiality or that objective other to come into that, and to provide a space for role modeling, I guess, must be really important. Last but not least, we're running to time, which is a miracle. I don't usually run to time here, but we are running to time. A piece of advice for those developing careers in the sector. And I think I always say it's interesting that it's in the sector, not just teachers, because there are people who will listen to this who want to work with kids in the same way I have, but don't want to be teachers or are not in the space to become teachers. So I'm interested, what's your advice for us as educators more broadly? What can we take from this?
I mean, this is a little bit of a repeat of what I shared earlier, but just to double down on it, I think we receive modeling of teachers as instructors. And if you are someone who goes to a teacher training program, you're probably taught to be an instructor, which is an extremely useful set of skills. But we miss the skill of being a facilitator, which is, again, more about conditions than content. So my encouragement would be to develop that skill. And the basis for it, I think, is deep listening. really listening to kids with trust that when they have genuine choice and they're not just reacting or trying to prove something to someone, they take themselves to the edge of their learning very directly. And that's what play is. So when we listen and facilitate them going where they want to go, they always go to the place where they're learning the best. So if we believe that, we relate really differently to them.
Beautifully put, and a great place to finish. Chris, this is one of those interviews where it really should be 2 hours. And really being lucky enough to have someone like you on this with the wealth of knowledge you have about kids and personal development, we should be having multiple episodes. So we may come back and need a round 2 on this.
Anytime.
But with the format glued in as it currently is, that's all we've got time for. I'm hugely grateful for you picking up on this from the other side of the world, and I think a wonderfully diverse perspective for those of us over here on a rainy Wednesday evening in London to hear from someone with a little bit of sunshine in their life and lots of great experience. So big thank you to you, and I hope I'll pass across very soon.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks, Henry.